Hello and welcome to the Molecule Pod by Eurogas, a new series of podcasts where we go in depth on the big issues in gaseous fuels and in energy. On today's pod, we're joined by Victor Bernabeu, Eurogas Director in charge of renewable gases. Today we'll take a look at certification, the Union database, and why it's the missing link in the search for hydrogen and renewable gas markets in Europe. Victor, I'm so glad that you joined us today for this inaugural Eurogas podcast. Today we have a very special edition on the Union database, something which is a little bit difficult to break down. But if you could, for our audience, describe, perhaps to start off, why this is so important. Why is it that we're not talking about this and we should be?
Yeah, thank you, Mathieu. Indeed, a bit technical, but extremely important topic. I would argue it's one of the most important topics that we've had at ENS at the moment, because it's going to be one of the most important pieces, I would say, in the regulatory framework when it comes to the deployment of hydrogen and biomethane. And as you know, those two type of energy carriers are going to be critical to replace natural gas. So getting it right is extremely important, but maybe I'm a bit jumping to the conclusion of all of that, because maybe we can start with that. What is the Union database? Why are we making a big fuss about it? Why is it important for hydrogen and biomethane?
Yeah, precisely, because you're saying, Victor, obviously we're focusing on biomethane and hydrogen here. There are climate imperatives on the journey to climate neutrality as soon as we can possibly get there. Then biomethane and hydrogen are going to be absolutely vital, but we're also, I suppose, is it not right to say we're also talking about the industrialization or reindustrialization of certain parts of Europe to create jobs in order to bring about successful industries across the whole continent?
Yeah, Union database is part of a wider topic, the topic of certification. Certification is one of the angular pieces when it comes to deploying a market. So maybe we can start with that. Why is it that important to get certification right? So when we talk about certification in Europe and in the world, certification of energy products, you're usually talking about the green credentials of a product, or to ensure that they've got a certain environmental footprint, or to ensure that they are sustainable. It's a wide array of things, but it boils down to a simple concept. You produce something like hydrogen or biomethane, and you attach to it a piece of certificate. You can call it a proof of sustainability, a certificate of compliance, a guarantee of origin that will show that the product is either renewable, low carbon, has a certain GHG footprint. That's your overall idea with that. And certification is absolutely key because you can see it twofold. First, you are a producer of green, renewable, low carbon product. When you're producing that, you want to make sure that when you're selling the product is actually green hydrogen, is actually biomethane, it's complying with certain criteria. So it gives value to your product. And those certificates, the fact that it needs to be compliant with certain requirements in terms of sustainability, also allow to give a certain value to your product. Renewable, low carbon, they're usually produced at a premium. So it's important both from a sustainability perspective, a renewable perspective. It's important for consumer. It's important for you as a producer to build a business case to make sure that you're producing actually something that is renewable, green, or low carbon. And it's absolutely key that we get it right. Because if you don't have a good certification, you're actively reducing incentive to produce the product. You're not capable of giving that piece of information that would make sure that this product is renewable or low carbon. If you've got a system in place which is not robust enough, this is where you create concerns about greenwashing. Yeah, this product is labeled as green, but I'm not too sure about the certification. So maybe some people exploited the system. Maybe the molecule is not as green as it pretends. So you need both to have a certification in place, create that incentive, create that demand pool for having more deployment of those gases, and something robust enough so that people are not arguing about the real environmental credential, green credential of your product.
So this is important. I mean, it's good that you actually again try and boil this down to who needs these kind of certifications. So we're not just talking about the consumer side, about the industry side. We're obviously talking about legislators as well. So yeah, it's important that we recognise who exactly needs this to be robust, this system. But what's the problem? I mean, why exactly are we not having a robust system here? Surely it's easy enough to certify certain molecules, to certify certain materials as green or not green. Why is this so complicated?
Because beyond entering the renewable or low carbon credential of a molecule, it's also very important because those types of certificates, they are used for plenty of purposes. They are used, as I've said, for disclosing the credential to consumer, but they're also used by member states, so member state of the European Union, to show compliance with our targets, our ambitions. When Europe is coming in by saying we want 40% or 45% of renewable energy, to make sure that they reach that target, you need to compare the amount of renewable energy. And to do that, this is why you're using certification. You're using certification to show compliance towards target. So getting it right is not only a problem of credibility, I would say, in front of consumer, it's also a problem of how you're going to meet your target. If you don't have a credible system, meeting your target is going to be difficult. Hence why the Union database. The Union database was an initiative that was launched with the Renewable Energy Directive of 2018. We call it the RED 2. It's the second revision of that directive. And the goal was for the European Commission to centralize everything into one union-based, one database with a union scope, all the information that we have. Because at the moment in Europe, we've got plenty of certification possibility, I would say, national initiative. You've got, maybe to explain it a bit better, you've got two systems in place. You've got one system called Certificate of Sustainability, which is used for compliance towards the target. And you've got one system called the Guarantees of Origin, which is used for consumer disclosure. A very good example that speaks to all is when you are having a new electricity bill, for example, you've got that option to tick a box to have green electricity. The big difference between those two systems, it's absolutely critical to understand it because it's the root of the concerns that we're having with the entire debate, is when you're ticking that box for having green electricity delivered to you, you're actually not receiving green electricity. You're just paying a bit in order to have that green electricity somewhere in the system. You're actively participating to the deployment of green electricity, but you're not really receiving that green electricity. One could argue, but it's not really green, I'm not consuming green. See the bigger picture, see Europe. What we want is more green electricity, but maybe there is no solar panel near you, that maybe there is no renewable electricity near you. You want to get rid of that obligation of having a physical link. Yes, you're not actively receiving that green electricity, but you are participating of having more green electricity in the system. So this is the big advantage when we're talking about guarantees of origin, that system which we call book and claim. You're not having a physical link between the production and the consumption. You're just making sure that at European level, at national level, what goes in and what goes out is equal. But it's not exactly a physical link between the two, which is the main difference with those certificates of sustainability, which are used, for example, for biofuel like ethanol or biodiesel, where you're physically tracking the product along the supply chain. This is the core concept of mass balancing, what we are using for liquid biofuel, for example, that physical link between the commodity and the certificate attached to it.
And surely, sorry to cut in, Victor, but we had a conversation about this some months back. Surely there's obviously a bit of a distinction between electrons and molecules. Surely, what's going in and what's coming out. How does that come into play? Why is that so important?
It's because when the Commission went ahead with the project of having a union database, they look at everything that was on their desk at the moment, which was that certificate of sustainability using a system of mass balance and those guarantees of origin using book and claim, and they're thinking, how will I reunite the two? So it gives you a challenge while trying to bridge the gap between the two. And one very good example of something that behave both like liquid and behave both like an electron is biomethane. Because think about biomethane as you produce it. You take some waste, for example, municipal solid waste, you put that in a digester, you're producing the biomethane. From that perspective, it's exactly like if you were taking wheat to produce alcohol. It's very similar. It's very liquid. You see the molecule, you can feel it in the tank. The moment you inject it into what we call the gas grid, which is when you introduce it, all the pipe that you're having in Europe, thousands and thousands of kilometers, it behaves a bit like electrons. You're no longer capable of tracking the exact molecule within the pipe. It would be nonsensical. You cannot have one person running around following its molecule because you've got billions of molecules. And once it's in the system, you're trading the molecule thousands of times before consumption. So you're not capable of following the molecule. It behaves a bit like an electron there, like when you're putting that into a transmission line for electricity. So you see, that was a problem that they're facing with the union database. I'm trying to centralize everything. I'm trying to compile, gather everything. That union database has a goal that we fully support, having something centralized, having a European market, because this is what we're talking about. I want to create a market. I don't want hydrogen. I don't want biomethane as luxury products that are not accessible to all. Our ultimate goal as Eurogas is to create that whole market from scratch when it comes to hydrogen and renewable hydrogen, and to ramp up what we have in biomethane. What we want is, you're in an industry in north of France, you want to access biomethane, you should be able to access biomethane. You want to transition to hydrogen, you should access hydrogen. It's not only a question of ramping up supply, you also need to link with the demand. Hence why we're talking about creating a market. And in the case of biomethane and renewable hydrogen, those are, at the moment, especially for hydrogen, a bit more expensive product. And they are there to replace either, for example, gray hydrogen or natural gas-based hydrogen or coal hydrogen, or to replace just natural gas directly. So if you replace them, it's absolutely critical that you are making sure that you're actually replacing something like natural gas by something that is actually sustainable, actually renewable. You have to make sure of it. Otherwise, why are you going through all that process if it's to replace something that is not green by something that is not green? That's really the question.
That's okay. No, I get that for sure. The problem is, Victor, is that we were saying that there's a bit of a bottleneck with the union database. We were saying that in order to get this biomethane market, this hydrogen market, and obviously reduce emissions, try and shift from more polluting to less carbon intensive sources, then we need to create a market. People's livelihoods depend on it. Markets create jobs, market create opportunities. But I'm a bit worried because you're saying, well, the union database isn't robust enough, but we need a union database to create a market. And a lot of people are waiting on this market. A lot of people are really banking quite heavily on a hydrogen market, and to a lesser extent, maybe a biomethane market. So what's the problem here with the union database?
So we talk about the fact that if we look at the goal of the union database, we like it in the sense that we like the idea of something union-wide. We like something that would avoid fraud, avoid double counting. It's everything that we want from certification, to be honest. The problem is, unfortunately, in the nitty-gritty. Devil is always in the detail. The Commission, when proposing the system, took an approach that was not really compatible with how the gas market is working. As I mentioned, they took an approach that was maybe designed mostly for liquids, some that you can track, some that you only trade only a few times before consuming them. The problem is that when you apply that kind of approach to gas, you will obviously struggle because, as I've said, you put the molecule within the system, you can no longer track it, you cannot longer track the trades, and honestly, you don't have to. You absolutely don't have to. You don't want to hinder the demand for those gases to the ones that are physically connected to the producers because, as you know, biomethane production is scattered geographically. It's not a centralized system. And hydrogen, depends how you see it, but it's likely that it's going to pop up across the European map in certain places, like industrial areas. But maybe if you're a consumer that is not part of that hub, you still want to access that hydrogen. But because you don't have the producer, you won't be able to access it. So that's a big problem that we're having. This is what we see as one of the biggest constraints with how the union database was designed. Ideally, for renewable gas producer, low carbon gas producer, our members, you want to be able to produce that new gas, that biomethane, that hydrogen, have that certificate, robust certificate, and trade the two separately. You will inject your biomethane to the grid, and then you'll sell that certificate to someone who wants to contribute to the deployment, but maybe do not have access to your molecule.
I'm seeing what you're saying, Victor, and it's a good point, but clearly it's a bit of an issue if there's some kind of mismatch and we're trying to put square pegs into round holes here at legislative level. I mean, what do you propose? Because clearly this is a bit of an issue. If we have such a mismatch here, then we can't have a hydrogen and a biomethane market. Do we have something at Eurogas? Do other people have other people published articles on it or think pieces on this? How do we do this?
So to understand that, we need to first think about where we are. So we've got the union database. Officially, 2023 will be the year where we're phasing in the union database. It's really a transition. And it was soft launch, if we can say, in January. The problem is, as I'm presenting it, I even realized that we did not really address some of the core question of design. We try to jump through all these hoops without thinking what I want to achieve. Do I want to achieve a market that makes sure that I'm not double counting? Do I want to achieve something where I'm making sure that I've got that physical link between consumption and production? So we see a lot of big design issue with that system. So for us, it's a problem of timeline. You need to make sure that first you've got a system that is fulfilling the purpose that you want. You want to make sure that everybody is on board, because those supply chains are big. From the producer to the consumer, you've got thousands and thousands of people, companies working. You need to have everybody on board. You need to make sure that everybody knows its responsibility. You need to make sure that it's compliant with what member states have been doing. It's compliant with what we have on the table at the moment. There's a lot of training and onboarding. Hence why we see the timeline as being a bit challenging, let's say, especially because, as I've mentioned, it's something that is backed by a European directive, and we are revising that directive as we speak. So we've got a system that is incomplete at the moment, maybe rushed. Not a criticism of the Commission. It's an extremely tough job to do, but a bit rushed at the moment against the legal background that keeps changing. So it's a big challenge, and considering all the ambition that we have for hydrogen, for biomethane, the 35 BCM of biomethane, the 20 million ton of hydrogen, we cannot afford to lose time. So we need to address urgently everything that we've noted. We need to clarify those interactions with existing system, those responsibility of stakeholders. We need to wrap everything up to launch those markets.
Right, thank you, Victor. But once again, I wonder why this has flown under the radar. I asked you about this. We had an internal conversation, and then, of course, decided to put this into a podcast, precisely because no one's really talking about the union database. This has flown under the radar, and yet you're saying that here we find ourselves with rather limited time to try and have another look at the design of this. What openings are there? What do you propose? I mean, do we need does it have to be delayed? Do we have to intensify efforts? Do we need to bring in more stakeholders? What do you think is the way forward?
So I think the best way forward, considering we're trying to clarify element of design, so we have to take decisions. I think the European Commission is left implementing a system where they require the input of the industry. It's mostly a call for action for anyone listening to us and for the rest of the industry. Eurogas and few other associations have been very active on this topic, but honestly, we pretty much need everybody when it comes to that, because we are talking about the future of hydrogen biomethane at the same time. Having that discussion restricted to a limited number of participants may not be the most sound approach to that. So obviously, Eurogas has ideas that we've been proposing for years to the Commission with quite a lot of success so far. But there are still so many challenges that we need to face to implement a proper system that really we would encourage anyone interested to contact us to touch base, because we need the input of other companies, even outside of Eurogas, to understand the challenge that they're facing, understand how they are dealing with things, and help them to decipher that very technical yet still very important piece of the regulatory framework in Europe.
Thank you, Victor. I mean, I think you have really launched a call to action with this. That much is clear. I'm just thinking that maybe not just industry, but maybe all manner of groups, academia and civil society, also have a real stake in decarbonising the gas sector, which is what we're trying to do. That's the imperative.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Victor. The work continues, and Eurogas will obviously keep everyone updated.
Thank you so much for having me.
For more from Eurogas, you can follow us on Twitter, YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can also go to our website at www.eurogas.org. We'll see you next time on the Molecule Pod.